Hey folks, welcome back. You know, making YouTube videos is just too easy these days, and for that reason I've decided to enlist Parrish to randomly throw things at me throughout. Just gives it a little bit more edge, you know? You know what I love about video games? The escapism. No matter what bullshit is going on in my life, I always know that video games will be there for me to make me forget about everything and just have a good time. Nothing to cheer me up quite like a fun little jaunt through the Mushroom Kingdom, Hyrule, Green Hill Zone, wherever Kirby finds himself at any given moment. Given the fact that the exclusive appeal of video games is to alleviate the player of their real-life stressors, you would think that the goal of every developer would be to make something that's not only fun, but also relatively easy. But man, that is not always the case. As long as video games have existed, really fucking hard video games have also existed. Ninja Gaiden, Castlevania, Ghosts and Goblins, Mortal Kombat. And if you think that last one doesn't fit in with the rest, go boot up Mortal Kombat and try to beat the AI. You can't do it. Now, the reason that those games were so relentlessly difficult is because they were developed with arcades in mind. They were made hard to drain as many quarters as possible, which is a perfectly ethical thing to do in my eyes. I don't see a single issue with bullying children into spending all their money. Because of that, you would think that super challenging video games would sort of die off as gaming moved from arcades to home consoles. You would be wrong. Joke's on you, dumbass. Joke's on you, stupid. They kept making hard-ass games. Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden aren't even arcade games. Aren't you even paying attention? People love a good challenge. Nothing worth doing is easy, to quote some asshole who's never played a Kirby game before. But there sits one game series atop the throne of famously difficult video games. I am, of course, talking about From Software's Dark Souls series. Or I suppose I should say From Software's Dark Souls / Demon Souls / Bloodborne / Sekiro / Elden Ring series, since there's no fucking rules, like whatever, right? Who cares? Dark Souls is one of the most beloved and one of the most infamous video games of all time. Not only is it so often used basically as a synonym for hard, but it also spawned an entire subgenre of Souls-like games that use similar mechanics. I absolutely love Dark Souls. It's one of my favorite video games of all time. And for that reason, I want to take you on a whimsical journey to Lordran. Lordran is where Dark Souls takes place. I probably should have said that before. Also, obviously, I'm going to be spoiling the absolute shit out of Dark Souls, so if you care about the story, get out of my sight this instant. Or whatever. So buckle in, because this is going to be a long one. Dark Souls is a huge... So here we are in Dark Souls. Remastered. Before you get all bent out of shape, I've played the original, okay? I'm just using remastered because the graphics are better, okay? There's no need to get all upset or whatever. So this is the problem with Dark Souls, you know? The fan base is just insufferable. And that includes me. Dark Souls begins with the most elaborate character creator of all time. You can create a character that looks like you, or you can concoct horrors the likes of man were never meant to comprehend. Here's my guy. I gave him blue hair to be cool and a big huge nose so that he can smell the enemies coming a mile away. I wanted to call him Long-Nosed Noah, but that wouldn't fit, so I guess we're going with Nosed Noah. Still accurate, to be fair. After that, we get a big long cutscene explaining the premise of the game, so here it is in a nutshell. A long time ago, immortal dragons ruled the world masked in fog. Nothing lived, nothing died. This time period is referred to as the Age of the Ancients. One day, a magical fire called the First Flame ignited underground, which enabled life, death, darkness, and light to exist, and as a result, the world was populated by thousands more different creatures. 3 of these creatures went into the First Flame and claimed a Lord's Soul, essentially making them gods. Gwyn took the Lord's Soul of Light, the Witch of Izalith took the Soul of Life, and Gravelord Nito took the Soul of Death. Meanwhile, a character referred to as the Furtive Pygmy, for some reason, took the Soul of Dark, granting humanity to mankind. With their newfound power, the Lords waged war against the dragons with the help of Seath the Scaleless, who betrayed his own by informing Gwyn of their weakness, which is lightning. And thus, humans took over the world. What could possibly go wrong? A long time later, we find ourselves in the Age of Fire, where humans rule the world but are inflicted with a curse wherein they are made to perpetually resurrect after death until they eventually go insane, a process referred to as hollowing or going hollow. Once all that's over, we head to the Undead Asylum, where the player character is imprisoned. And there he is. Looks exactly how he did in the character creator, right? Now, if this is the first time you're playing Dark Souls, you might be asking yourself, why does my guy look like that? I spent 3 hours meticulously making him look exactly like Jeff Goldblum, and now he's all spindly and decrepit and red and gross looking. Well, if you were paying attention, you would know that the reason your character is in zombie mode is because they're hollowed, which is actually a major game mechanic that I will explain later. Anyway, just when you think you're gonna rot in a cell for the rest of your life, one of the very few nice people you'll be encountering in Lordran throws a glowing corpse through the hole in the roof. You loot the body to find the key to your cell, and your adventure begins. Here we are in the Undead Asylum, essentially the tutorial area, and let me tell you, this is the perfect way to do a tutorial. You find these markings on the ground that tell you how to play the game, you get your first bonfire, and you get the first boss, the Asylum Demon. Now this big fat piece of shit might seem like a beginner trap, and he kind of is, but what you're actually supposed to do is run past him. You don't gotta fight that big scary guy, it's only the beginning of the game. Trust me. A little bit later in the asylum, we meet our friend from before, Oscar of Astoria, who has unfortunately been brought to the brink of death, probably by the aforementioned blue monster we saw outside. Before he dies, however, he gives you the most important item in the game, the Estus Flask. The Estus Flask is your healing item for the rest of the game. By default, it carries 5 charges and fully refills every time you visit a bonfire. So, surprise, I actually lied. You do have to fight the Asylum Demon, and he's actually pretty difficult, especially if you've never played the game before. But one thing I love about this fight actually happens right before you fight him. You start on this platform above him, and if you stand there and dick around long enough, he'll jump up and knock you off. What you're supposed to do here is jump off the platform and perform a plunging attack, which takes 1/3 of his health right off the bat. This is such a great way of demonstrating the plunging attack because it's one of the most useful techniques in the game. Anyway, after you beat Big Blue over here, we get scooped up by a giant crow and brought to Firelink Shrine, essentially the hub world for Dark Souls. So now that we've gotten past the tutorial area, let's get all that boring shit out of the way, shall we? Just for clarity's sake, I'm going to be spending the next, I don't know, period of time explaining all the game mechanics and stuff. So equip that thinking ring, because this game is really complicated. Like, there's a lot of shit to go over, I'm sorry. But it's going to be fun, trust me. Dark Souls is essentially a very combat-focused action role-playing game. You have a shitload of combat options. Each weapon has a standard attack and a strong attack. Holding up your shield obviously protects you from taking damage, but most enemies in the game can break your defenses in a couple of hits, and because of this, Dark Souls relies very heavily on rolling to avoid attacks. Every enemy telegraphs their attack in one way or another, so becoming proficient at timing your rolls gives you a huge advantage. There are a ton of different weapons that all work differently. Melee weapons like daggers, swords, axes, ranged weapons like bows and crossbows, and also catalysts, flames, and talismans that let you perform magic. Every weapon scales with a different stat, and you know what, let's just talk about the bonfires, okay? It'll clear up everything nicely. Everyone knows about the bonfires, right? Bonfire lit. You know what I'm saying? Am I right? Do people still say lit? Is that still a thing people... In a nutshell, bonfires are checkpoints, but they're also so much more than that. Every time you rest at a bonfire, everything resets. Your health gets filled, your Estus Flask regains all its charges, and all the enemies that you've killed since your last bonfire rest respawn. Every time you die, you lose all your souls and warp back to the bonfire you most recently rested at. But if you can manage to make it back to the place you died without dying again, you can reclaim your souls entirely. Bonfires allow you to do a number of things. You can repair and strengthen your weapons and armor, access item storage, and warp to other bonfires. The other two things you can do are level up and reverse hollowing, which requires a bit of an explanation, so let's get that over with. Now you're probably thinking, oh Ben, I may be a stupid asshole, but I know how leveling up works. I've played a role-playing game before, for gosh sake. Now look, I respect your intelligence. And when I say you, I mean you. Not this guy, you know? I fucking hate that guy. But trust me, Dark Souls it's a little weird. It's a little different in how the whole leveling up thing works. Don't you worry, I know you're smart. So we all know how leveling up works, right? You kill enemies to gain experience, and then you use said experience to become stronger. And Dark Souls is similar. Every time you kill an enemy, you get souls, which are used to level up, repair your equipment, and buy items. Rather than just giving you a blanket level up, Dark Souls lets you individually upgrade one of 8 stats to your liking. Vitality is your max hit points, attunement determines how many spells you can equip, endurance affects stamina and equip load, strength and dexterity are required to use certain weapons and also power up said weapons, resistance determines defense and immunity to poison, and intelligence and faith determine the power of spells. This obviously allows you to play the game in any way you want. If you want to cast spells, you can upgrade intelligence or faith. If you want to go melee, you can either scale with dexterity, which is generally used for fast, smaller weapons like katanas, daggers, and curved swords, or you can opt for strength, which is used for heavy-hitting, high-damage weapons like great swords, axes, and hammers. I'm a creature of habit and generally go for strength because I like carrying around a gigantic f***off sword, but the great thing about Dark Souls is the fact that it accommodates so many different playstyles. The other thing I have to explain is hollowing, and this one is a little bit more out there, so get ready. As I mentioned before, pretty much every human in this world is inflicted with a curse wherein they are constantly resurrected after dying, after which they were referred to as hollow. Now you might think that that's just a fun world building thing, but it's actually kind of the most important mechanic in the game. Another item you can come across in this game is humanity. This little counter in the top left of the screen determines how much humanity you have activated, or whatever. If you have humanity at a bonfire, you can select reverse hollowing, which turns your guy from red man to yellow man, if you know what I'm saying. Am I right, fellas? How many 90s hip-hop / 80s reggae fans are there in my audience? It's gotta be one, right? At least. Now, what's the benefit of being human, aside from being slightly less disgusting to look at, you may ask? Well, obviously I'm going to tell you. Being unhollowed allows you to kindle the bonfire, which adds an additional 5 Estus Flask charges every time you rest there, and it also makes the bonfire much bigger, which is a neat little detail. It also allows you to summon people to help you with bosses, some of which are NPCs like Solaire with the Gargoyles, Iron Tarkus with the Iron Golem, or Maneater Mildred with Quelaag. But also, if you're connected to this crazy high-tech thing called the internet, you can also summon actual random people to help you fight the bosses. It's so cool. On the flip side, however, being unhollowed also opens you up to being invaded, wherein random people can come fight you at any moment. And by fight you, I mean kill you. I mean 90% of the time it's some guy with the strongest weapon in the game and faster internet than me, so I don't really stand a chance either way. And that is a pretty compact explanation of the gameplay as a whole. Dark Souls has so many mechanics and such fleshed out gameplay that I could honestly probably sit here for 2 hours and talk about it. But that wouldn't be any fun at all, would it? But now, folks, it's analysis time. But we don't have to be serious about it. We're still gonna have fun. Dark Souls is a big ass game. Like, I'm talking huge, ladies and gents. On top of the crazy elaborate gameplay, there's a bountiful semi-open world, crazy good level design and atmosphere, and a few unforgettable NPCs. And because of that, I want to touch a little bit on everything. Don't worry, I'm gonna try and be pretty concise, because if I were to sit down and really elaborately talk about every area in the game, we'd probably be here for the next 6 to 8 months. So for that reason, I'm going to break the rest of this episode into 2 chapters. One where I'm going to do an overview of the events in the game, and another one where I'm just going to ramble like a 7-year-old talking about Transformers, because I really love this game, man. Like, it's like in my top 5 of all time. So without further ado, Arthur, okay, you can stop doing it.
You asked me to.
So, as I said, once you finish the Undead Asylum, you get carried by a birdie to Firelink Shrine, the main connecting point for all the areas in the game. This guy, the Crestfallen Warrior, who is 100% not going to go hollow and try and kill you later, tells you that you have to ring the 2 bells of awakening, one up above in the Undead Church and the other one below in Blighttown. So you go to Undead Burg and fight a Tauros demon. He's pretty hard, although what I really like about this boss is that it subtly reminds you of the plunging attack. You see, once you walk out onto this bridge, there's a guy up above shooting arrows at you. So obviously, to make the fight easier, you go kill his ass, and in doing so, open yourself a nice ledge that you can plunge attack the Tauros demon from. After you defeat the Tauros demon, you emerge to a bridge where you meet the main event, baby. There he is. Hell yeah, brother. This is Solaire of Astora, one of the very few allies you make in this game. And I almost feel like I don't need to explain who he is, because he's basically become the mascot of Dark Souls. Like, even if you've never even heard of Dark Souls, I'm sure you've seen him, or at least his symbol. If you've ever been to a convention, I'm sure you've seen people doing the praise the sun gesture. In a nutshell, Solaire is, he's a big fan of the sun. Like a huge, like a really big, he really likes the sun. Like, he just stands there and looks at it. He's actually one of the most important NPCs in the game, and you'll encounter him several more times. But when you first meet him, he gives you the white sign soapstone and teaches you all about the multiplayer summoning aspect of the game, or as Solaire puts it, engaging in jolly cooperation. It's funny if you played the game. Anyway, the next area is the Undead Parish.
Undead what?
The boss is the Bell Gargoyle, and when I say Bell Gargoyle, I mean Bell Gargoyles. because you have to fight 2 of them at once. Holy moly. Thankfully, you can summon Solar to help you out. Thanks, buddy. After that, you go to Lower Undeadburg, where you fight the Capra Demon. This guy fucking sucks because he has 2 attack dogs and you fight him in a closet. And then you go to the Depths, where you fight the easiest boss in the universe, the Gaping Dragon, and you're off to Blighttown. Now, a lot of people will tell you that this is the point where the game truly begins. But those people would be stupid, because in actuality, the real game began when I hit play on Steam. In all seriousness though, Blighttown is the true beginner test. If you can get through Blighttown, you can truly accomplish anything. This area is famous for swinging bridges, guys who shoot toxic darts at you, poisonous swamp, infinitely spawning mosquitoes, golems that throw boulders at you, the game running at 10 frames per second. Blighttown is a fucking nightmare, and worst of all, it's capped off by a battle with probably my favorite boss in the game, Chaos Witch Quelaag. When I first played Dark Souls, I swear to you that I spent somewhere around 2 weeks trying to beat Quelaag. It was fucking nuts, man. Of course, I now realize that the reason I couldn't beat her is because I didn't notice that she telegraphs her big AoE attack by bending forward. And in my most recent playthrough, I beat her in 2 tries. That wasn't phenomenal for my self-esteem. Anyway, after beating Quelaag, you ring the second bell of awakening and head back to Firelink Shrine, where you meet a new friend. This is King Seeker Frampt, and you're probably thinking, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I never, as long as I live, want to look at that ever again. And you'd be right, but he's actually a good guy. Frampt is a primordial serpent, which means Frampt tells you that your destiny is to defeat and succeed Great Lord Gwyn. And in order to do so, you have to retrieve the Lord Vessel from Anor Londo and fill it with the souls of Grave Lord Nito, the Witch of Izalith, the 4 Kings of New Londo, and Seath the Scaleless. So now it's off to Sen's Fortress, and man, if Blighttown didn't break down your spirit, Sen's Fortress will do the trick. We got snakemen shooting lightning at you, giant swinging axes, pressure plates that shoot arrows at you, massive rolling boulders, giants that throw firebombs at you, mimics, elevators that send you into spikes, the list goes on. Jokes aside, no matter how many times I play this game, I still have a bitch of a time with Sen's Fortress, but on the bright side, you do get to meet some important NPCs. Siegmeyer of Catarina, probably my favorite character in the game. He's an onion knight who constantly finds himself in conundrums, and he's always very thankful to you for solving said conundrums. And then of course you have Big Hat Logan. You know, I love Dark Souls because the lore is so interesting and the story is told in such a brilliant way. But then you also have Big Hat Logan, who's called that because his name is Logan and he wears a big hat. The boss of Sen's Fortress is the Iron Golem, and he's pretty easy, honestly. After you beat him, these nasty-looking gremlin guys come and transport you to Lord Gwyn's mile-high Sunlight Kingdom, Anor Londo, and holy shit, man. Anor Londo is probably my second favorite area in the game visually. It's so epic and beautiful. Don't be mistaken, though. Anor Londo is still very hard. You got these big sentinel guys, mimics up the ass, silver knights that shoot great arrows at you that are basically just spears. Anor Londo is also home to another of my favorite NPCs, the giant blacksmith who uses tiny hammers and talks like this.
You come, I forge, we talk. You, good friend, I, very happy.
The boss of Anor Londo is Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smough, who you have to fight at the same time because this game is a nightmare. Once you beat them, you get the Lord Vessel, and then it's back to Firelink Shrine to show Frampt so that he's all proud of us. This is the point where the game gets really crazy and opens up a lot, and because of that I'm going to try and rapid fire get through everything else, so put your seatbelts on. The Catacombs is awesome. There are indefinitely respawning skeletons that you need a divine weapon to kill, and the game doesn't tell you that. After that, you got the easiest boss in the game, Pinwheel, followed by the Tomb of the Giants, where everything is pitch black and crawling with 10-foot tall skeletons that kill you in one hit. Then you got New Londo Ruins, which is full of ghosts that you can't hurt unless you're cursed, and the game doesn't tell you that. Also, in order to fight the boss at the end of New Londo, you have to defeat Great Grey Wolf Sif, who is in a completely different area nowhere near New Londo, so that you can get a ring that lets you traverse the abyss. And do you think the game tells you that? The game doesn't tell you that. You got the Duke's Archives, which is actually a really cool area. I don't have much bad to say about it aside from the invisible bridges and the crystal caves, although they're not really that annoying, to be fair. Seath the Scaleless can suck my ass, though. He curses you, which permanently reduces your health by half unless you get an item to cure it, which fucking sucks. I hate this stupid naked dragon. And then finally you have the Demon Ruins, followed by Lost Izalith, the part of the game where FromSoft ran out of money. I hope you like this guy, because he's the only enemy you're going to be seeing in this whole area. And of course Darkroot Garden and Darkroot Basin, where you get the ring you need to fight the 4 Kings in New Londo Ruins. And then there are also several other areas that you don't really need to beat to progress through the main part of the game, but are still cool anyway. You get the Great Hollow, which is a big tree full of basilisks and these random mushroom guys that are a lot stronger than they look. Ash Lake, this area basically serves no purpose aside from completing Sigmar's questline. Valley of the Drakes, It's exactly what it sounds like. And last but not least, my favorite area in the game, the Painted World of Ariamis. The Painted World is accessed by going through a painting in Anor Londo, and it's so beautiful, man. Like, I have a soft spot for winter levels, I will admit, but the Painted World is so gorgeous. It has this dingy, wintry, medieval thing going on that I absolutely love. And finally, once you've completed everything else, you give the Lord Souls to the Lord Vessel, opening the door to the Kiln of the First Flame where you fight Gwyn, the last boss, and...
That's the game!
Holy shit, that took a long time. You're still here, right? But now that we've got a full overview of the events, it's time for the fun part. I already said this, but Dark Souls is like one of my favorite video games of all time. So I kind of just want to sit and talk about all the stuff I love about it. But don't worry, this isn't just going to be me sitting here kissing Hidetaka Miyazaki's ass for however long it takes me. I am going to point out a few things that I don't like about the game, though they are just pretty small little nitpicks because, you know, this game is a fucking masterpiece. So, ladies and folks, welcome to Chapter 3. Where do I even begin with Dark Souls, man? It's a weird game in a lot of ways, because it's probably difficult for a lot of people to understand why I love it so much. Like, if you go into this game blind, there's a good chance you're gonna have one of two reactions. One, this game is too hard. Or two, what do I do? Where do I go? Why do people like this game so much? And that's perfectly reasonable. I think one of the downsides of Dark Souls is how cryptic it could be. Like, this game tells you pretty much nothing. The only real direction you get about the story and the gameplay is through NPCs, who you can usually pretty easily miss. And even if you do talk to them, sometimes you gotta talk to them a few times before they actually give you information. Hell, some of the major story elements are mostly only revealed through descriptions of certain items. You really have to give a shit if you're interested in understanding the lore here. And in a lot of ways, I really like that about this game. I think subtle storytelling is something that more games ought to do. I also think that the way that the game teaches you how to play is brilliant in a lot of ways because it respects the intelligence of the player while also doing its best not to overwhelm you with information. For example, summoning is a huge mechanic of Dark Souls in pretty much every Souls game, but you don't even get the ability to summon until you find Solaire on the bridge after beating the Taurus demon. You can't even summon until after you've beaten 2 bosses. And I think this is great because it gives you time to figure out the controls, how the combat works, how to fight certain enemies, all the stuff you can do at the bonfires, etc. Dark Souls has the foresight to wait and let the player become comfortable with the game before telling you about the whole summoning mechanic. And that's one thing I love about this game. It doesn't treat you like an idiot. You're an adult, figure it out yourself. Like, it seems easy to criticize the game for not telling you everything, but the thing is, the game does tell you stuff. You just have to ask NPCs. It's like real life. God doesn't just send you a message telling you how the world works. You have to ask people and figure it out yourself. I've played this game so many times that I can almost speedrun it, and yet I still learn new things every time I play it. For example, I learned in my most recent playthrough that if you drop a prism stone off a ledge and the fall is far enough to kill you, it'll scream. I also learned that this blacksmith straight up explains the difference between reinforcing weapons and armor and ascending weapons and armor, and all I had to do was talk to him. Go figure. And that's what I think is so unique about Dark Souls. A lot of games throw friendly NPCs at you and just flat out tell you this guy's your friend. But in Dark Souls, it's up to you to learn about the NPCs. It's like real actual human interaction. And same goes for the story. Apart from the cutscene at the beginning, it's up to you to figure out the lore. And another great thing about that is that the story doesn't have to matter if you don't want it to. If you want to experience Dark Souls entirely for the gameplay, you have the choice to do that. The cutscenes are skippable, most of the NPC interactions are optional. Hell, you don't even have to listen to them if you don't want to. You can just up and walk away mid-sentence. It's nuts, man. Like, I can't think of another game that has such an elaborate, fleshed out storyline, and yet is also totally fine with you completely skipping past the story entirely. It's really how every game should be, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I love a good story, but I spent hours in the mines making money to buy this game. I shouldn't have to sit through cutscenes if I don't want to, Pokemon. Now, I mean, does Dark Souls take a little bit too far? Sure. There are points in this game that I think could have used a little, or maybe a lot, more direction given to the player. A good example is the Four Kings. In order to fight them, you have to jump down this well, which kills you unless you have a ring called the Covenant of Artorias equipped. You get the Covenant of Artorias by defeating Sif, the boss of Darkroot Basin, way in an entirely different part of the game. And the only character who tells you this is this random guy who you find on a rooftop and can very easily be missed. And even then, he tells you that you have to defeat Artorias, which is confusing because you can't even fight Artorias unless you have the DLC. And another thing, why can't I equip more than 2 rings? I've got 10 fingers, haven't I? Man, that's a lot of complaining for my favorite game. Dark Souls is a legendary game. Even if you don't like it, you gotta admit that it had a huge impact on gaming as a whole. It spawned a bunch of sequels and spin-offs, and basically pioneered an entire genre of video games. To tell you the truth, I don't even think it's the best game in the Souls series. I mean, Elden Ring exists, let's be real with ourselves. However, I do think it's definitely my favorite in the series, but you may ask, why? The obvious answer to why is Dark Souls so good is probably the gameplay and controls. Very few games, especially games of its time, had such tight and fun controls. Every enemy engages you in a fight. You're not just dispatching enemies as if they're nothing. You're having a showdown with every man, woman, and mushroom that wants to have a go with you. But what makes Dark Souls such a memorable experience, in my opinion, is the atmosphere and sound design. For one thing, visually, I mean, holy shit, bro. This is Dark Souls Remastered, but it looked this good in the original, just not quite as high resolution. The best example, in my opinion, is the painted world of Ariamis. This level is just gorgeous, man. The spooky snow-covered mountains, the horrific bloody basement area, the giant Colosseum-looking structure in the middle. The whole game gives off this authentic medieval vibe, but it also perfectly shows off the depressiveness of the Dark Ages. Another perfect example is Anor Londo. So Anor Londo is this huge, beautiful, bright kingdom designed for both humans and giants, as shown by the staircase leading up to the castle, which has normal-sized stairs and big stairs. Cute little detail. But once you defeat Ornstein and Smaug, you have the option of killing Princess Guinevere, who, spoilers, isn't actually there. She's an illusion. If you do this, her brother's sister Gwendolyn turns Anor Londo dark. Most of the enemies disappear, and the kingdom is plunged into an eternal night for the rest of the game. It takes an area that, while it wasn't exactly a happy-go-lucky place before, it makes it spooky and unnerving, and worst of all, it's all your fault. You could have just not killed Big Titty Lady. But yeah, in a nutshell, every single area in this game is beautiful in its own way. Even Lost Izalith, while pretty empty, is still visually stunning. It gives off this East Asian kingdom vibe that I love. The other thing I love about Dark Souls that I don't think it gets enough praise for is the sound design. FromSoft knows how to make the sounds in a game really mean something. Part of the reason the combat in Dark Souls is so satisfying is because of the sound design. When you parry an enemy's attack, you get this that simultaneously indicates to the player that they can pull off a critical hit while also making you feel so triumphant. I can't think of another game that relies so heavily on sound cues. You learn that when you hear that there's an arrow coming for you, and even if you can't see it, you can try and roll at the right time to avoid getting hit. That said though, probably my favorite aspect of Dark Souls sound design is the bonfires. The bonfires emit this noise, and it's so comforting, but it can also be heard from a distance. You'll be running around an area getting your ass kicked when you finally hear that beautiful, quiet humming of refuge, and it just motivates you to keep going. And I could go on, but for brevity's sake, here's a little compilation of sounds I love in Dark Souls in no particular order. Okay, folks, it's been a wild ride, but before I go, I got one little last segment, and it's very personal, so just bear with me. I know that this might seem kind of lame, and I know that I'm far from alone on this, but Dark Souls really just has a special place in my heart, and because of that, I just want to sit and talk about why this game means so much to me. So I hope you're ready to watch a grown man talk about how a video game changed his life, because that is what you are about to witness. I already said before that Dark Souls is not the best game in the Souls series. From a purely gameplay standpoint, that obviously goes to Elden Ring. Hell, if someone who had never played a game in the series asked me to recommend one, I don't even think I would say Dark Souls. I would probably say Dark Souls 3 because it's more linear and accessible to new players. That said though, this is definitely my favorite in the series, and one of my favorite video games of all time. And my reasons are mostly personal, but hey, I am a person after all. I first played Dark Souls when I was 19, back in 2016, and I beat it a year later after having put just under 100 hours into it. This game basically occupied an entire year of my life. I took big breaks in between, but I spent a full year with Dark Souls in the back of my mind. And on top of that, I had a bunch of friends who were either playing the game for the first time at the same time as me, or had beaten the game a bunch of times before. A lot of my close friendships were strengthened through Dark Souls. It's the type of game that almost makes me wish for the days where every single part of every game wasn't immediately accessible on the internet, because experiencing Dark Souls through word of mouth is so much fun. People telling you strategies, locations of special items, how to beat certain bosses. It was just such a magical experience. And Dark Souls is so great for that because it has so much going on under the surface. Havel at the bottom of the tower, an undead Berg who will fuck you up if you try to fight him early on. Quelaag's sister behind the invisible wall. You can go back to the undead asylum and fight a harder version of the asylum demon. You know, the second of 3 times you fight him. Like, I mean, no offense to the Asylum Demon, but if I had to pick a boss to recycle 3 times, probably wouldn't have been this big blue piece of shit, I'm not gonna lie. He even comes back in Dark Souls 3, like, what the somebody was really proud of him, eh? And in addition to that, this game is so fucking hard. Like, look, I know everyone knows that Dark Souls is hard, but it really is, man. It's fucking brutal. Like, you think you've got an area figured out, and then suddenly, boom, 5 spinny wheel skeletons in a totally black room. Fuck you. It just wears you down. The game kicks your ass over and over and over, and you keep dying to the same boss, and eventually you just say, fuck this, and quit. But then the next day you go to work or school or whatever, and you spend the whole day thinking about it and strategizing in your head. But then after so many tries, you finally win, and you feel on top of the world. And then you walk to the next area and the game throws some other bullshit at you. Yeah, that's whatever. That's not a big deal. You know, the checkpoint is only on the other side of the fucking map. Overall, I don't even know what else to say, man. Dark Souls is a one-of-a-kind game and is bar none, without a doubt, one of the most important video games in my life. I can't think of another game that instilled such a sense of wonder and exploration in me. Basically, what I'm saying is, I went into Dark Souls a boy and came out a man. And that, my friends, hollow and unhollow alike, are my thoughts on Dark Souls. If you can believe it, I actually had to restrict myself with this one, because if I sat here and talked about everything I love about Dark Souls, I don't think you would ever be leaving. That's how much this game means to me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I appear to have left my video ending shoes in 2022. So to end this one, Arthur, play a compilation of me parrying knights in Anne Orlando, because I'm good at it and it makes me feel good about myself. See you next time.